In this video, we're going to learn how to draw Morrigan from DarkStalkers. We'll take some reference here. I've got my DarkStalkers official complete works, and we're going to take that information and use it to build and construct our own version of the character. This video is less about fan art and more about learning to draw. So we're going to use this character, which I think is actually a really good one for learning to draw. There's quite a number of things here, including the wings, the general pose, the hair. Some of the costume details here are really good to sort of explore some very basic drawing fundamentals. These techniques for breaking a character down and figuring out how to draw them are the same sort of things that I do all day, every day when I'm drawing comics or creating character designs for concept art. Now, as I often say on this channel, I'm not a huge fan of fan art. I actually recommend that you create your own worlds, your own characters, your own designs, and that's really what I enjoy doing the most. But these characters are fun to break down because I think they're often well done, they're well designed, and you can learn a lot from doing that. Although I have actually drawn Morrigan before for a professional illustration job, and you can see the image here that I sort of created. It ended up drifting a little bit away from my own personal style though. So I'm keen here in this video to, see how I would personally interpret this design and, get that sort of vision going a little bit better. So this should be a fun one. Let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name's Tim McBurney, and on this channel we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. And again, if you want to learn a little bit more about line and color illustration, this is the same sort of technique and process that I use when I'm creating comics and concept art, etc. Again, very similar to the type of process that, you would see in a lot of the, sort of older Capcom design work. If you want to learn a little bit more about this, about how I do what I do, you can check out my free Quick Start Guide. It's aimed to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop, creating your own digital line and color process and style. It's free. The link will be in the description. So yeah, as I said, the idea of breaking down a character like this is super important if you're going to be drawing comics or if you're going to be designing your own. It's just really good to be able to understand the proportions of sort of characters that have gone through a really good design process. And more importantly, it's a really good way for us to learn how to draw and get those basics going. Form, construction, all of those things that we really need when we're drawing day to day. Tools for today are going to be obviously the reference books here. I've got Capcom Design Works and DarkStalkers, the official complete works. Although I have to figure out which I'm actually going to use because there's not a lot of great pictures of Morrigan kind of on the left-hand side that are from the sort of original design, which is what I'm always trying to get at. I'm always after the original design that, again, was sort of, part of the original set of character illustrations that was put out. Less so sort of, work that was done after that, because I think, it's often these original designs that really capture the essence of the character for me. And again, I'm just always a fan of this type of illustration. So a lot of it is studying not just the design, but also the drawing, the quality of it, what works, what doesn't. Again, I think you can learn a little bit from trying to, work through this type of process. Yeah, this is a really cool book, DarkStalkers Official Complete Works. I think the art from the DarkStalkers game, which again is like a Street Fighter fighting style game, is like one of my sort of favorite sets of art. I love the sort of the hatching style that they got, and you can see I actually use a lot of that sort of style in my own work to a certain degree. But yeah, really cool art book, really fun designs. And again, when I saw these designs in the arcade back when I was a kid, there again just was like a huge sense of sort of possibility and shape design and all of that stuff that again I really appreciate out of Capcom style design. In terms of drawing, I'm going to be using a Blackwing matte pencil. I have a 2-stage Blackwing sharpener that, again, these are not actually that good. They always seem to break, but that's sort of what I'm going to be using. I'll probably be using a kneadable eraser, putty eraser of some kind, and I'm going to be drawing on some Strathmore drawing paper. This is the Smooth Surface 400 series. Again, sort of like 80 pounds, 130 GSM. If we refer to any of these anatomical models that I'm often using, I have a skeletal and anatomical écorché. These ones are from anatomytools.com. But yeah, let's jump in and get started with the drawing. So just looking at the reference, the sort of design that I'm probably aiming for, just so you can sort of follow along, is a little bit more like this version of the character, which I think is just a good, and this actually exists. If you Google the character, you can see a version that I think is very close to this type of model sheet, but it is colored and rendered up quite nicely. So this is kind of what I'm aiming for, but you know, because I think it's a good mix of sort of good anatomy, good design. I think the shapes are sort of working well there, and it's worth sort of mentioning that this is a design that is often highly sexualized in the way it's sort of shown, and I think that's a big part of the character. She is a succubus after all, and but that's not really what I'm going to be dealing with in this one. I might do a you know, another video specifically looking at how you would sort of hypersexualize the pose and do that again in a tasteful way, but you know, how you get that stuff happening. But yeah, you know, for now, I think we're just going to be drawing her in a fairly standard pose, and I'm actually going to be following along with maybe this one, because this will just let us see the character and get the costume sorted. All right, as usual, let's look at how we might draw a typical anatomical figure here. So in this instance, we're going to be dealing with a Andrew Loomis style mannequin or stick figure, and this is really where what I'm doing is drawing a very simplified version of the skeleton, and this is basically like a glorified stick figure, right? And what we're going to do after that is just look at, you know, how we would get the standard sort of female anatomical proportions sort of working, and then we'll look at how we might again, you know, specifically apply that to the type of character that we have here. So again, if we sort of look at the standard proportions, right, I've got a standard skeleton here, boom, boom, and again, this is just very rough, just sort of roughing it in. All right, so again, we might have something a little bit like this. So let's look at how we might modify the anatomy, right? And again, like the anatomy that she has, let's make this ribcage a little bit sort of smaller. The anatomy that she specifically has is not that sort of far off, you know, a typical, you know, sort of idealized figure, you know, your sort of typical video game, you know, sort of comic book style figure. So that's really what we're going for. What we're trying to go for is, again, probably sort of tucking in the waist from a Capcom sort of design style. What we're probably going to find is going to help us is if we exaggerate the length of the legs. So let's, again, see if we can get it looking a little bit more like how we want our sort of more cartoony designed look to be. So in this case, again, let's sort of draw down there. And I think it is important to, you know, separate the pose, which is often going to be sort of hypersexualized for a character like this, from the basics of it. It's really key to be able to dial that stuff up and down, have control over it, and, you know, we don't want our understanding of the character's pose to, you know, potentially overpower our ability to draw. Which is to say, you can make something look interesting by over-sexualizing it, you know, making it look, you know, a particular way. And, you know, I feel like that's often a route some people take. And I think it's important to sort of separate that from our ability to draw well. So again, it's always dangerous if you're, using particular tricks to make people interested in what you're doing. Make sure that's separate from your basic foundation of, how do I draw well? So we'll start off, because the character is quite nicely designed, right? There's lots of good stuff. All right, so again, what I'm going to try and do is tuck in the waist, right? And then we're going to come out here. And probably, again, make the legs a little bit sort of longer. Although, it's not like she's supermodel tall or anything like that, but that's probably something I'm going to want to do. So I've done that a little bit here, but again, we might find that we need to do that even more. So let's also look at, the basic sort of costume details that we're going to be messing around with here. Right, so this is the, maybe how we'd sort of modify the character from an anatomical standpoint. What we also need to think about is costume details. Right, how do we sort of make this pay off? So again, this is sort of just very sort of standard. Again, not all of this anatomy is sort of perfected. But yeah, we want to sort of tuck in the waist. We want the hips to go out a little bit. And I think that's probably going to do it for us. So what else can we do in terms of thinking about the costume? Well, there's a couple of things here. Right. So let's do that process again, and we'll see if we can add that costume. And then what I also want to do is break down a few of these little costume ideas. But yeah, all I'm doing here is drawing a stick figure, and I'm adjusting proportion, right? So the first thing we need to think about is proportion, which is just, are the legs longer? Are the legs shorter? What's exactly is going on? So let's, again, transfer those same points here. Got our sort of rib cage, right? And the rib cage is really just, just a simple sort of sphere that's squished a bit, and what we're trying to do is find some dimensionality there. So find the dimensionality. Let's find the shoulders. Let's think about what happens with our spine, right? I'm trying to find the spine as it comes up. Right, find the head up there. Head might be a little bit high, we'll see. And I'm trying to find the points. So proportion is really just a matter of space. So if we think about an arm, proportion just has the start and the end of an arm. If we think about form, form is where we would think about what are the muscles that hook onto the arm. And they're two separate things. Proportion is really important. If I get the proportion wrong here, none of it is going to work out. So what I'm looking for proportion-wise is the width. Right, so here we've got the width of the rib cage versus the hips. And I'm also going to try and compress this up a little bit relative to this space. So the hips, now we don't have to go out that much, like that far, but it's these subtle little differences, and not just the difference, but the degree to which we kind of remember as we're drawing it to put in these little proportional differences. Right, so again, where's this character going to be? Right, so if we sort of double, right, if we think about the figure is normally divided into two parts, right? Top, bottom, and they're going to be equidistant from the top of the head to the bottom of the pelvis, which is again just the bottom here. Right, so basically this and this are going to be very similar dimensions. So if we sort of measure that and then we measure down and then I say, well, let's just add a little bit, right? Let's give it that sort of heroic fighting game look. So we're going to go down here and then I'll say, well, let's cut that halfway. Boom. And what I'm doing here is just giving that sort of comic book normal, sort of spring to the figure, right? So we've got some nice spring there. Boom. Right. See if we can put this arm up here. Boom. So again, those are pretty standard proportions. Now, proportionally, again, I've got, like a lot of things there that are going to help me. It's not just sticks, right? It's some anatomy, some of that skeleton. And what we'll do here is think about, again, repeating this anatomy. So what we've got is, boom, again, put in the breasts. And then think about how the waist is going to tuck in. And think about having knees, shoulders, right, forearms. Where's the kneadable eraser? Here we go. So yeah, if you get sort of stuck where you're hacking away at this and it all gets sort of muddy, then that's what the kneadable eraser is for. Right, so that's what we're going to have. And now let's look at the costume details we're going to have to deal with. We have the love heart that is there, and then we have, again, some pretty sort of serious curves to the sort of top bra thing that she has. And then, again, important to note how it kind of wraps around and has that sort of fur on it. So we've got to put that in there. And I think the high cut 80s style costume is probably like the most extreme out of any of the Street Fighter Capcom designs, right? A lot of them have it, but she has, probably the most extreme example. All right, so then we have the kind of bangs. We're going to have a few strands of hair that are going to come forward, and then we have some of this hair that's going to go back, and it goes back a fair way. I'd say sort of around there, right? Again, sort of almost halfway up the figure. And often a lot is made of the hair, right? The hair is really gets a lot of sort of special treatment there. But this is really what we need to start to think about. So again, the next thing is going to be these wings, right? And this is where we really need to understand how constructive anatomy can help us here. So what we're trying to think about is, like, how do we construct something like that? And if we break this down, it's going to help us a lot. So if we think about, okay, this is roughly where the head is from a structural standpoint. So they kind of come out. So what we need to think about is, yeah, what can the constructive anatomy help me with? Like, where do they come out of? And how do I measure them from side to side? So there's a lot of basic structural drawing here that will sort of help us, but at its core, what we're trying to think about is how we transition from a two-dimensional set of measurements, right? So if we think about, okay, here's the head, right? Here's the middle of the face, and we're trying to get these equidistant things either side. So often what we're dealing with is that same construction, right? But just viewed from perspective. Now, how we divide these up and how we think about a lot of this structural drawing is probably a video for another time, but again, hopefully this will give you a little bit of a taste for how important that sort of constructive anatomy stuff is when we're dealing with these kind of symmetry issues. So you can see there, right, they're kind of coming forward, right? So here, let's get this right. They come out, then they come forward. And again, how high do they come up? Well, they come up above, right? And they sort of go together. Got these big spikes here. And then we've got this, which sort of comes down, right? Sort of coming down in front. So again, we'll do all of this again in a larger version, and you can sort of see how we deal with this. But these are those sort of initial marks that we need to make. Boom, boom. Now how many? 1, 2, 3 spikes. 1, 2 extra ones, right? Then we're going to make that. Now again, what you might find is that we want to sort of move these around, right? So we imagine these are articulating, right? They can sort of articulate, and we can, you know, move them around as much as we want in order to, you know, make them look a particular way. But again, that's like a good sort of understanding or sort of thought process I would have for the structure. So that's something you can sort of practice a little bit, right? Try and understand what's happening there. But really, this is a larger sort of issue of figuring out your constructive anatomy as you go. What else do we have to do? We have to do exactly the same thing, right, with these wings, except I think they kind of come down, even though it's not necessarily visible there. If we look at some of the other drawings of the character, so here you can see a little bit of how the sort of general idea works, right? It's coming down from here, then it's coming up, and exactly sort of how it works is sort of tending to vary a little bit from image to image, but I think this is a really good one here. This is quite small, but yeah, you sort of get an idea for it. It's one bone down there, another one there, and then it feels like it's curving up there. So that's the general idea that I'm trying to follow. So it's really important to get the number of articulations right. So we're sort of coming up here, and then we're going like this. All right, so if we come down, we're coming down here, going out here. Now again, let's transfer that over here. So we're going to draw through. Right, we're imagining, oh, I can see that one up there, right? It's going to be behind. So I'm sort of imagining, you can think of it as like, okay, they're going to connect like here and here. Well, I'm kind of imagining as I'm looking at it here where both of those points are going to be. So this is part draw through and part visualization. And yes, this can get kind of messy and you can get a lot of lines going everywhere with draw through. But here's the other thing I'm going to do, just basic construction, right? I'm looking at the points that I created and I'm transferring them across. Now, the guesstimation, right, we can think of for how those curves go is based on a little bit more experience. But right, this is kind of where I'm going with it. And how far do they go down? Fair way. How many of them are there? 3 spikes in total, and they get bigger as they go. And it feels like this sort of bottom one here is connecting all the way. Although that, again, that's sort of tricky to figure out. So what that means is if we sort of look at it from a structural point of view, again, it's coming down from the back, coming out, sorry, coming over, right? And then that is kind of curving. And it feels like 1, 2, 3. And yeah, not quite sure whether that is hooking in there, that tent. That seems like it's varying a little bit depending on which version of the character is being illustrated in particular. So again, this is where you get to make a decision about what looks cool. But that's kind of the general idea. Now, the sort of curve to it, right, is very much related to, I think, how you want the shape design to work. This is where you get really interesting intersections between structure and design. So if you're actually drawing this, what you want to focus on a little bit more is shape design. And you kind of see this with a lot of the way that characters are presented by, sort of high-level artists is, yes, we need to think about the structure, but you need to think about how the structure of those wings is going to create interesting shapes, how you might kind of twist that, basically, to optimize for the most important thing, which is make it look cool, right? So always remember, when it comes to shape design and drawing these things out, that again, a huge thing that you're trying to do is just adjust and optimize for, hey, like what looks cool, what's working, how do you take this and actually sort of turn it into an interesting illustration. So we need to consider and contemplate a lot of these ideas, like, okay, like where is this one going? What is the shape and look of this that's coming out from the side of the head? So again, just to do that again, if you're sort of following along, right, we have a generic face, and she has, again, this hair, normal ears, and then out the side we have, right, it's sort of like a curve, right? If we think about it from a design perspective, it's kind of like this. So if you're drawing it small or you're trying to break down the character, it's this feeling, right? It's this feeling here that gives you the visual iconography, right? So visual iconography of all of these wings is like this. And if you stick with that, it's mostly going to work. But you need to think about how to create those shapes. Again, if you're trying to construct them in 3 dimensions, because sometimes they will look a particular way. So how I'm sort of imagining, okay, there's one bone, right, sort of coming out here. Right, one bone coming out here. There's another bone coming out here. We got this big old spike claw. And then we've got 1, 2, and again, if you want some sort of structure here, again, just think about this, right? This is the other iconic line. 1, ooh, that's probably going to go there, but we'll just pull this here anyway. Right, and these are quite spiky. And then we have webbing. Right, so there's a curve to it, which gives it, again, this is all the same sort of sharp look. And here again, what we're sort of seeing is, where does it join? It kind of joins before we get to the things that are sticking inside the head, right? Which again is like, when you actually kind of realize this, you're like, oh, it's actually a bit of like a weird design, right? It's just kind of sticking out of her head. But anyway, that's like the general idea. So not the best sort of drawing there necessarily, but this gives us an idea for how the structure for this would work. Right, and again, these are our sort of secondary forms that we're playing with. So I'm being a little bit sketchy, but you can be sketchy with a lot of this secondary form. It's really just a matter of you understanding it. All right, and then it's just a matter of continuing. Right, we add detail as it were. So again, not necessarily trying to nail the character 100%, but that gives us an idea. So that's what we got to think about. We got to think about all of these different elements as we're drawing. Iconography, form, proportion. We combine all those and then we get a particular sort of look. Now it's important to respect and appreciate the feeling of the iconography, because one of the things I've noticed, again, just sort of quick pro tip, is that if you are drawing something like this for a professional job, what you'll tend to get people wanting is the iconic feeling. So again, we're going to need and want this kind of curvature, right? We're going to need and want this feeling. And what you might do, which is what I'll often do, is break it down from the form and kind of then say, oh, look, this is kind of how it would look from this angle. But you can see here, I'm drawing it from the side, but I'm not really getting the iconic feeling. And I would say most of the time what people are going to want is this look, right? They're going to want this iconic look. Even if I kind of look at that and I say, well, if I twist her head, then yeah, I feel like this one's going to go in front of that one. It always reminds me of this classic story that I heard, and I think it's in Disney's The Illusion of Life, which is a great sort of big chunky book on sort of the history of the Disney company. And, I think they had a really, really talented animator and sort of part of the team called Freddie Moore. And he was just one of those people who would always make stuff look good. And this is what I always equate with the visual iconography. And, he would be drawing Mickey Mouse. And I think classically with Mickey Mouse, it was literally, his head is like a big coin, his ears are a smaller coin, and people literally would trace them. And people would be trying to draw Mickey. And Mickey is, that sort of classic design where, again, you sort of got one shape here, right? And then you got these kind of two shapes here. And again, I have no idea how to draw Mickey Mouse, but I guess the question was, like, people would try and draw him from different angles and they'd have trouble getting it to work. And I think they, would sort of go and ask this guy, and he'd sort of, when you have someone who has good instinct, they are really, really good at combining visual iconography, clarity with form, and they naturally make good decisions. And I think his basic reply was, just don't draw him from a different angle, because the design works iconically from this angle, right? The classic sort of Mickey Mouse look. And if you draw it from a weird angle, it stops looking like a Mickey Mouse. It's the same thing here. When you're dealing with a lot of these design elements, you have to kind of present them in an interesting way. So that's something that I would always look at when you're looking at how people have drawn these characters. Now you might be saying, oh yeah, they're just kind of good drawings. But what someone's doing, and I think this is a great example because it's a different sort of artist with a different artistic style, taking on a lot of the Capcom and SNK designs. And what you can see is, it's not just that the person is drawing the character. They're taking into consideration all of the elements that make the character look good, that make the design feel like it should. And they're doing quite a good job of combining those things. And, even though it's just sort of drawing, these characters, in a particular angle, from a particular thing, it's not just draftspersonship. It is, a good combination of all these things: iconography, structure, form, good choices. So always remember to put that in and make that part of your study. Anyway, let's see if we can take all these things, combine them into a single kind of, more or less sort of finished drawing where we take some of these things, and try and combine them. So let's start out with trying to mock the proportions up. Now, I was thinking about whether we get a new page or whether I just do it here. I think I'm just going to do it here. And again, we'll just try and combine all these ideas. We've sort of got to fit this character in a fairly small little space, and I want to sort of draw the wings. So I'm going to try and think about how we might do that. I'm going to have roughly about halfway. I'm going to leave a bit of extra room for the legs here. Again, we don't ever want to be drawing stuff right at the margin because it makes it sort of fiddly. The idea is we want to fit the top half in here. So it's going to be a little bit bigger than this. We're going to have a head around here. We're going to have our torso around here. We're going to have our pelvis around here. That's going to be the general idea. And this will give us a good indication of the size. Boom. Boom. And again, let's think about where those legs are. Let's sort of put them out a little bit. Now again, to me, I'm always sort of thinking when we do the proportional thing, these legs look way too big, but again, often when we actually sort of put it together, it can kind of work out. And it's always easy to make these legs a little bit shorter if we need, but I think this is the general idea we want to sort of work with. So still going to keep this torso about the same, and keep these shoulders again about the same, something like this. Again, let's see if we can put the elbow up. Right, have some sort of proportional skeleton mannequin mock-in like that. I think we're going to have to make our head a little bit bigger. So you see when I'm, often doing these, I'm using a very similar pose. Again, that's something that you can do as well when you're doing your basic proportional mock-up, and I think it can really help to, just dial everything in. Make sure you're on safe ground to a certain degree. So I'm drawing in a little bit extra of this proportional mannequin, really trying to make it simple, easy to understand what I'm doing. I'm not sure whether that head should move a little bit one way or the other. And I'm doing what I normally recommend, which is that we think about the proportional bones as, again, as I said previously, proportion. And what we're doing is just massing simple forms onto them. So thinking about the shoulders, the forearms, and this gives us a great sense of, look, how big is this character going to be? Now, this is where, again, often what I'm talking about will deviate a little bit from the standard anatomical models and markers, because what we have to do here is take into consideration the character design itself and how we might think about posing that. So we know what we have to do to kind of figure out, okay, again, coming back to this idea of iconography versus form, like what is going to look good? So I've got my line here that is going to be very similar to a simple mannequin, right? Boom. Right, similar to what we did there. And again, similar to, where does it go? Oh, it sort of seems to line up about with the leg. So I'm going to draw a line past there, right, just at the leg. And then I'm going to use that to put in a rough idea of where these wings are going to be. So just double, triple check that's all accurate. And again, what I can do is think about, okay, maybe I don't need to put in all the little bits, but just a simple mark like that will give me a good indication of like where the form is going to be. And this is where I can start to think about like how my overlap's going to work, right? Like, can I see what's happening with this? All right, how are all these little bits and pieces going to intersect? I would say with this character that having the bangs, right, the fringe there is going to really help us understand what is going to happen with that form as well. Right, got an ear, and the character seems to have quite a bit of hair. Right, so again, I'm going to draw that hair through. Think about where that's going to be. And let's really dial in where that face is, because I need to consider where these are. And this is where, probably looking at the form, it feels like these are going to come like sort of in front of the character, right? So that, right, if we look at how this is happening, if we look at the profile view from the side, ear, this is where this thing's coming out, and it feels like I have my maybe one proportional little bone, and then the other one is coming up here. And what I'm going to try and do is, again, make sure I emphasize this curve. So I'm going to think about a construction. If we visualize this from a two-dimensional standpoint, and I have my head here, and I'm almost imagining that there's a plane. Right, plane is in, like a bit of paper, right, a two-dimensional object here. Now I'm not adding heaps of perspective to it or anything like that. I'm just getting very simple. But this is sort of what I'm imagining, right? And these are the lines that I'm drawing. All right, so I've got this one. Again, looking at where these come down, it seems like they come down even further than that. But as I said, I'm going to try and emphasize this curve. Because that is iconically, I feel like, going to give us the right feeling. Now again, they might feel like they're too big. This is where you really have to play around with proportion, and this is why this stage is so important. And again, the more sophistication we have here, the easier it's going to be to, really get in there and figure out the form. Just take a bit of that out there so that's a bit clearer. So I'm going to work out all of these things as sort of a construction level. Then I'll take this down and we'll see if we can add some detail and also double check this. Boom. All right. So at this construction phase, what we're after is getting all of the little bits and pieces together, right? Like, is this going to work? So thinking about where this line is. But again, it's less about drawing it in and shading it and all that. It's really just the lines that I need. I need the lines. And I need to know that roughly these lines are going to work, right? They're gonna give me what I want. So we progress from these forms into something approximating anatomy a little bit more. And we are also going to draw these bits of hair that are coming down here. But again, for now, all I need is a line, because I'm just trying to get the flow. I'm trying to think about, if we consider, for instance, here I have the head, or actually here I have the torso, and I'm imagining that form. And here I have the head. And what I'm trying to visualize is, well, okay, if I drop a line here and then it hits this form, it's going to sort of wrap around, right? If I have hair that hits the torso, it's then going to follow that line of the torso. And this is why it's so important to understand what's happening with the form, so that when we've got these things like hair, we can let it wrap around the form. So that's why, again, just doing these exercises will, help teach you a lot about drawing. Get rid of this hand because it's probably just confusing at the moment. All right. Now the other thing we're going to do is think about, okay, here are the knees. Right. The line of the pelvis there. Again, as I'm often doing with these demos, you can see we're going to see the glutes behind there, depending on the perspective, but it's always good to be able to, figure out all that anatomy first. And then you can decide, look, is something else going over it? Does the pose support that, etc., etc. So this stuff may seem really simple, but often drawing is a matter of just doing all of the simple things again and again and again and again. So you can see that, the sort of anime, comic book style anatomy is pretty egregious when you're looking at it from the proportional standpoint. Once we start to put some lines and things over there, it will start to kind of make more sense. I feel like the head here might need to be a little bit bigger. We'll see. Right, so I'm just wanting a bit more spring in this arm, right? Coming in and then coming out. So there you go. I mean, we've got a lot of this stuff. What I'll do next is put in, right, some of these other indications. Now, do we need to put more stuff there, right? Do we need to, draw these other lines? Yeah, kind of, but I think, again, it's really just important at this time to think mostly a matter of what are the proportions? Where are these major proportional markers going? All right, so what else do we have? Again, we've got this that's going to make up the costume, right? And these will significantly change the look of the character, right? The character will start to feel like the right type of character once we put in all those details. And here, again, we've got to remember we're going to have this heart shape just below the breasts. Here, bump, bump, bump. And just make sure we're finding the form there. And yeah, the sort of egregious high cut 80s look. So yeah, that gives us the basic sort of rough in here. Other things that I'd normally do is again think about a few of these other proportions, but you can see that there's a point of the drawing where again it's sort of constructive, and like I need to sharpen the pencil, and sort of more is not going to be more, right? More is going to be less. So it's a good time to kind of leave it. There's a few more details that are probably worth sorting out before we do that, such as these feet. So let's have a look at this again. She's wearing boots, and I think more specifically kind of high heel boots. So let's have a look at that, right? Because that's something I hadn't considered. So from the front, it's a lot harder to to figure that out. But let's have a look here, right? So we're going to drop down. All right, this is where the heel of the foot is. And that's where the high heel is going to go down. And then we kind of want to think about the position of the foot. Sort of relative to that. So that's, again, super rough, but that's the basic idea. So we're still thinking about where this sort of contacts the ground, but if we view that from the side, right, I've got the heel of the foot is coming down here. That's sitting there, and then we've got, right, the high heel, and then sort of thinking about, okay, where does that foot go? Right, so we've got toes here. So saying nothing of the ethics or practicality of the high heel as a combat boot. But anyway, that's sort of what I'm going to do. Now we can also see these don't seem to be super high, these boots. They're about there. So yeah, once we've got that mostly sorted, what I'm going to do is just check the proportion. So I'm going to lean it up and just check, like, hey, look, what have we got right? What have we got wrong? Where is this proportion going? Do I have this right or not? And I feel like, yeah, the head needs to be a little bit bigger. I'm tracking the center line down here. Boom. Where's center? So I feel like that neck will be okay. I feel like these shoulders are maybe a little bit wide. but that might just be necessary for the overall design that we're going for. Now again, we can't see what's happening with her hands there, so we'll just sort of check out whether or not, I forget, yeah, I think basically she just kind of has these cool, it's almost like this is one long glove, and the way that it goes around her fingers is sort of interesting, so we just got to remember that. Right, rough in some hands. All right, so let's see if we can knock this back, and then we'll go in and see if we can push some of these details. So I'm going to knock back most of this, and this is still just construction drawing, right? We're really dealing with primary, secondary form, how to draw stuff versus, you know, how you know, what is necessarily like a great drawing. I can see that, yeah, I feel like this, right, this foot needs to come down a little bit more. But yeah, let's see if we can just get rid of some of these construction lines. All right, we don't need this stuff once we've kind of figured it out. See if we can keep our pencil sharp, go in there and have a go at refining. So again, a number of different ways we could sort of do this. Again, I still feel like this head is a little bit small, and this is sort of part of that idea of, you know, playing around with the proportion. Right, as the legs and things get distorted, I think that the face can easily get distorted too. All right. So we have that big form of the face there. And we have the big form of the fringe. What I'm doing now is trying to turn it into something. Next thing we're going to have is, again, this. Let's put in that. Again, we've got 1, 2, 1, 2. Again, get this happening. Hopefully not ruin look of the face. Again, not heaps of room in there to draw a really detailed face with this big old chunky one saw, but see how we go. Get rid of this. All right, so I feel like that's working a little bit better. All right, what else have we got? So we got this line down here. And here we've got these kind of forms that, again, I'm going to simplify a little bit. But again, that's just a stylistic thing. Then we've got this arm. Right, we've got this breast. This breast, again, always good to, because this is, not final lines. Good to construct those things as much as we can. We've got the center line here. So again, probably got to draw this a little bit lower. This is where it's sort of thinking like, oh, maybe we do need a bit more torso to play with. And again, we're going to have these lines versus these lines. See if we can sort those out. And again, the way you kind of build these things up is just by slowly erasing All right, let's think about what's happening with these hands. So I think what happens is that, again, dealing with quite a small drawing here, we have this sort of look. And again, I think the design will be contextualized a little bit better if we put in a bit of tone there. Right, that's going to make it make sense. Same thing here. All right, what else have we got? We got the hair, and I think the hair is actually going to come over these. All right, so these come behind the hair because they sort of come out of the hair. And again, let's make these a little bit darker. Same thing here. I've sort of got where they should be. Now it's a lot easier to go in there. So yeah, a lot of what we're doing when we're creating, a more refined drawing. Oh, this looks a bit sort of thick compared to the other one. Is just sort of saying like, look, I've got the basic space, I've got the proportion, I've got what needs to be there. Sharpen that pencil because I'm drawing quite small. Gets a bit fuzzy. So now I can kind of focus on putting in the line, right, exactly where it's going to be. Get that spikiness going. Again, try and block in those shapes. That'll give us a pretty good indication. All right. And yeah, I mean, you can keep going, right? Like what I'm doing normally is, if I'm trying to get some kind of finish with the pencils, is just, we can just keep going. Keep adding subtlety. You can keep erasing. Let's see if we can figure out these tangents. There might be some texture on the hair there. It's going to help us. All right. So again, starting to come together. You can play around with tonality. All right, make it look a bit prettier. Now again, these legs are a little bit sort of knobbly. Boom, 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 boom. Again, we could probably refine these shoes a little bit more. Just going to block them in, just so we can read the design a little bit. The more we can read the design, figure out how far we've gotten, how close we've gotten, the easier it will be to, just assess your overall success, right? So again, that's a big part of why I do that. So again, the other thing that I would do here is, let's finish off this. Right. Again, a bit of a claw hand, but that's right. And yeah, the other thing that is a major part of the costume is these sort of bat wing things on her tights. So I don't know whether there is an official position that these are meant to be, and I'm just going to put in some rough iconic marks and see if we can. Again, I'm just being super rough, but this will help us get a bit closer. And now I'm just going to put in, again, just slight tonality change. And yeah, that gives us a pretty good indication of what this costume should look like. And yeah, there you go. So how successful have we been? Let me know in the comments what you think. Again, I think some things worked out well. Some things, yeah, I feel like I kind of like how I feel like we've managed here to get those sort of anime proportions working pretty well. I think in some of the previous sort of Street Fighter, Capcom demos I've done on a similar vein. Again, if you haven't checked those out on the channel as well, I feel like again, they were looking a little bit more again like this, like this type of proportion, right? But I do like to try and think about, okay, like what is giving the character that look? Is it proportion? Is it just the costume? Is it the pose, etc., etc.? And just see how much we can sort of dissect and analyze those things, because when you're designing your character, often you're sort of doing it here and you're really thinking about like, okay, what are they wearing? How does this work? What do they sort of feel like? Or what you might do is just kind of do a cool picture of someone who is posed, and then you have to kind of break that down and say, okay, what are they wearing? What is my character wearing? How does this actually work? And then sort of break that down to like a bit more of a character design look. Think about it. Think about your iconography. How does the character design's iconography of your design work? Pay attention to that. You combine all these things, and that's what allows you to day in, day out, draw the same character in your comic, or if you are given this type of subject as a professional illustration, or you just want to do some fan art, it's really useful to break these things down and have a little bit more control. And also a few things that you can go to say, okay, this is not working. What am I missing? Is it the iconography? Is it my general drawing? Is it the pose, right? Etc., etc. The more we can control these things, the more fun you'll have drawing. Although it does sound technical, again, from my experience, this is very much related to, how much fun you have, whether you can troubleshoot what's going wrong with your drawing. etc. But yeah, as I said, anyway, let me know if you found this one useful in the comments below, whether you'd like to see some different characters. I know that I've gotten a huge number of suggestions for different characters, and I think it'd be cool to sort of work through those. But again, just for now, just sort of picking some iconic designs, but definitely going to try and dive into some more challenging characters to draw. And yeah, continue this process, and hopefully we can learn together, get better at drawing, designing, etc. together. Other than that, we'll catch you around. Happy drawing.